Hello everyone, my name is Swati and today I'll be talking about the Partition Literature course in semester 6. The paper on partition literature largely looks at representations of partition of India in 1947. It kind of aims to explore or give a comprehensive overview of the literary responses to one of the most traumatic events in the history of the Indian subcontinent, and it does so through a vivisection of the experiences of trauma and violence that followed the partition of India in 1947. It covers literature from Pakistan, Punjab, West Bengal, and Bangladesh, and it explores a range of genres to document this violence, such as poetry, short stories, novels, all of which serve to give a record of the trauma and the violence of partition from a literary sensibility. One of the most important factors when we are talking about the partition is the role of memory and how we reconstruct such a violent episode in the history of the Indian subcontinent through a literary lens, and how does such a reconstruction differ from historical accounts of the event that's found in official documentation. So the course has a set of objectives. One is to enable an understanding of the effective resonances of partition across variegated geopolitical spaces. The effective resonances would again refer to the experiences of trauma and violence that individuals suffered during partition, which any historical narrative would be inadequate to kind of encapsulate that sense of trauma and violence that people underwent and the effect that it had on their lives. Another objective is to pave the way towards a better understanding of the country's post-colonial realities. So partition history comes under the aegis of post-colonialism or post-colonial India, and how it marked a moment of transition from the colonial to the post-colonial phase, and how that reflects on the narrative of colonialism itself. The third objective is to familiarize students with following thematics through the study of literary texts. One is communalism, what we understand by communalism, the sense of community, and what instigates communal violence, and how do we kind of narrate the idea of a community and a nation state, and how do multiple communities interact within a nation space, what kind of relations they share, and what results in communal violence, or what instigates communal violence. The experiences of homelessness, exile, which was an after effect of the partition, and the migration, the large scale migration, genocide, rehabilitation, resettlement, the notion of borders and borderlands, all that the partition, the event of the partition threw up a number of discursive frameworks that we can engage in through the post-colonial lens. So basically, as part of the learning outcomes of this course, we'll seek to understand the concepts and backgrounds to partition literature, the historical backdrop, as well as simultaneously, while assessing the historical backdrop, we'll try to reconstruct a mnemonic or narrative of the partition, or a narrative which is based on memory or fictional accounts. And what we would try to do during this course is to study the textual nuances of partition literature, the textual understanding of literary representations of partition, and obviously we'll be shifting between text and theory, the theoretical lenses through which we can study partition, and how does a literary sensibility shed special light on the event of partition and helps us to access certain facets or dimensions of the event which perhaps a historical documentation would not suffice to cover. So basically, the partition of India in 1947. If we kind of reconstruct a short historical overview, if we are to give a short historical overview, it ended in the loss of home for millions of people, where 1 million people lost their lives in the run up to the independence. It was the culmination of a series of events which were which were political in nature, and political undercurrents that led to the division of the subcontinent into two nations, leaving, and it was something which left in its wake haunting narratives of trauma and violence and unreconciled emotions. So irreparable differences between two communities which suffered this moment of rupture, and how that kind of left a scar on communal relations during the subsequent phases of the post colonial nation state. The division proceeded from initially it was a series of political deliberations which which were carried out on the administrative front, which proposed partition as the only solution to intercommunal violence and fratricide and bloodshed. And through the decades of the 1940s, what we witnessed was communal riots erupting in various parts of the subcontinent, such as Noakhali, Bihar, Punjab, and these were gaining in frequency and intensity. And what happened was, following the communal riots, the years that led up to 1947 saw mass refuge influx and migration of the country's religious minorities. The birth of the new nation states of Pakistan and India followed rioting and communal conflagrations, and unprecedented and unimaginable changes in the urban landscape and demography. Okay, that was my brief historical overview of partition and why we should study partition literature. The partition of 1947 meant a redrawing of the map of South Asia. There was a huge scale population shift and a redrawing of borders and contours and a redefining of identity, of national identity. So it was a redrawing of the map of South Asia and creating new borders and borderlands. And it resulted in massive population migration across these borders of the newly independent nation states of India and Pakistan. Millions of people from different communities such as Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims crossed the freshly defined boundaries in West Bengal. Alone, an estimated 30 lakh Hindu refugees entered by 1960, while 7 lakh Muslims left for East Pakistan. So these were ordinary people who suffered these traumas of displacement, murder, and violence, mayhem, what we find missing in the historical documentation is because it has a hegemonic structure, it kind of homogenizes the experiences of partition, but what is largely missing in the historical documentation is the role of public memory of these years, which has not been researched adequately, and individual experiences have not been documented to kind of gauge the effectual resonances of partition. So what happened is in the 1990s, two female researchers, Ritu Menon and Kamala Vasan, commented on the vast abundance of political histories of the events, which were defined by a lack of social histories. They also noted an absence of feminist historiography, the reconstructing the narrative of the partition from a feminine perspective. And around the same time, Urvashi Butalia began to retrieve, through interviews and oral narratives, the stories of the smaller and invisible players of the events. Those would be the women and children, or any marginalized communities or people like scheduled castes and tribes whose experiences were largely left out of the historical documentation. and the homogeneity of nationalist discourses. These studies have recognized and documented violence to see the importance of to see the importance of personal memory, to demonstrate the plurality of how one remembers the partition. So there are multiple perspectives on the partition. It cannot be mediated through one single nationalist discourse. So we have a multitude of voices that kind of problematizes the narrative of the partition. So we see that even within the same community, one remembers partition differently because there are differences of gender, caste, class, which kind of create variegated memories. Partition studies have recently undergone a new and critical sensitivity that now take literary representations more seriously than before, because literature is one of the ways of kind of individuating the narratives of the partition. A form of representation which involves reconstruction, memory, and is deeply implicated in an imaginative understanding of the event rather than just a factual historical narration. So, with these objectives at the back of our mind, we would try and delve into the terrain of partition literature and how, in order to understand and study how literature contributes to a very unique understanding of partition. Thank you.